Hi, everyone. You're tuning in to Radical Good with your host, Radha Friedman. In this video podcast, we're going to explore the question, what will it take to get more resources into the hands of women and girls, especially women and girls of color, women and girls who are queer, women and girls with disabilities, or all of the above? How can we be more intersectional and inclusive? I've spent 2 decades working on gender equality issues all over the world. And the universal truth that I've seen is that when you invest in women and girls, it creates a ripple effect of benefits that spread through her family, through her community, and ultimately through the world. We'll talk with powerhouse women and some male-bodied allies to hear inspiring stories and learn some practical ways that we can use the resources we have at our disposal to advance progress on equality by spending like it matters, giving like it matters, and investing like it matters so we can really narrow the gender wealth gap. I am so excited to be able to talk with you today, Sachi, and thank you so much for joining me in this conversation for this video podcast, Radical Good, which is really an opportunity to help people think about how they can really give with meaning, all of the things that they can do, from volunteering to investing to putting their money in small businesses to giving to nonprofit organizations. And I'm particularly excited to be talking with you because your career has so many beautiful illustrations of the kind of impact that one can have in the world, especially when you're focusing on looking at communities who have disproportionately suffered or had barriers to the kinds of opportunities that others have had. So for anybody who doesn't know who you are already, you are one of the co-founders and also currently a board member of Upaya Social Ventures. And before that, you were with Unitas, which was one of the very first microfinance accelerators out there that was helping to accelerate microfinance organizations doing incredible work, investing in poor communities and poor women who often did not have access to any kind of banking by really helping them grow quickly. And before that, you, of course, were working with a small microcredit organization that went big very quickly called SKS. And this is where our stories grow together because I also worked at SKS long ago. I was the first full-time employee back when it was just a husband and wife startup organization. So we have that shared history together.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so I wondered if you could just start the conversation by talking a little bit about your journey. How did you land here at this organization, Upaya Social Ventures, which has been now recognized at the Clinton Global Initiative and the Wall Street Journal, et cetera? How did you land here?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Radha. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And this is obviously, a topic I care so deeply about. So I am amazed whenever I say this, but Upaya is very nearly a decade old. And when I co-founded this back in 2010, 2011, I had just come out of the microfinance industry. And as you mentioned, I was just exiting Unitas at the time. And I had entered Unitas having worked on the ground in India with SKS Microfinance. And me wanting to start Upaya was really because of certain gaps that I had seen on the ground when I was working in microfinance. And don't get me wrong, I think microfinance is a wonderful vehicle. I have seen all the transformation it has helped bring about, but it can't be all things to all poor people. There are certain things it's very good at, and then there are certain gaps that I felt really needed to be addressed. And one of those key gaps was how it supported entrepreneurs. And so obviously the very premise of microfinance, or microcredit, I should say, is the ability of an organization to give one individual a very small loan. And so you can think of loans like in the sizes of $500, maybe $1,000 at most. But to one poor individual, that can be, such a lifeline, because a woman can take that and maybe just start a very small enterprise, a sole proprietorship, if you will. And so the women that I was working with when I was based in Delhi, had ideas to start like a small bangle making business in their homes, or set up a tea stall right outside the slum and sell tea to people passing by. And so obviously you have these small business ideas that these small loans were able to give rise to. The problem was, if you had an idea for a bigger type of business, a more scaled up version of that, the kind of business that could create jobs for others, not just you as the one entrepreneur, that's where microfinance hit its limits. Mm-hmm. Microfinance as a model finds it very difficult to give loans beyond $1,000. And so when I was trying to grow our microfinance operation, I'd come across a lot of entrepreneurs who already had a small business. Maybe they had employed 5 or 8 people, and they had a going concern, but they were asking for funds more like in the $25,000 range, which made sense because they needed to buy machinery, they needed to really invest, they needed to grow to the next level, and they weren't able to really deal with a $1,000 loan. It just was way too small. And I was completely unable to help these businesses. It was beyond the scope of what we could do as a microfinance organization, but I could see the potential. And I was thinking, wow, if they could just get access to that capital, they could create hundreds of jobs. And entrepreneurs at that level, what we call the missing middle, those small and mid-sized businesses, were completely starved for capital. There was nobody that was financing in that range. So when I transitioned out of microfinance, I said, I wonder if I can set up a company that just focuses on this sector with a goal of creating jobs for the most marginalized. And so we started Upaya. We started by crowdfunding, quite honestly. I still remember, opening our bank account with $600 in it, and just slowly building it up, slowly building a support base, and testing this with a few really passionate and committed entrepreneurs. And I always kept thinking, okay, if we fail, or if the model just doesn't make sense, or if people aren't really bought into it, I could always close this up and go get a real job. But I at least want to try, because I saw a need and I want to see if I can fill it. And now we are still here 10 years later. We've invested in 21 entrepreneurs, half of who are women, I'm really proud to say. And between these 21 businesses, they've created over 15,000 jobs, which to me, just really proves out our vision of, you empower a few good entrepreneurs and you can empower thousands of other people through them.
I love everything about what Upaya is doing, in part because you really are getting at this missing section. These are people who are too big for a microcredit loan of a small amount of money, but they're not yet big enough to take in a major investment from a bank, and there's nobody there to help those people. And so you end up with this disparity. And the people that you're investing in, these are job creators. These are creating jobs for their entire communities. It's really something I think more people should be thinking about when they're looking at the places where they want to put their money to create the greatest good for strong communities to thrive. And so there's a piece of microcredit within all of this, or as part of the investment model, that really drew me in initially. And I'm curious to know if you had the same experience. I don't know if you've had the same experience, but I walked into microcredit thinking, this is the panacea, like this is the silver bullet. All we have to do are find the most disenfranchised, vulnerable people, which are going to be women of color living in poverty, and give them money and all of the world's problems will be solved. And of course, it took me about 30 seconds to get schooled by many of these women to understand that, in fact, there are systems and structures that have been built to ensure that they stay in poverty, and that, in fact, it was much more complicated than that. And I still, from that moment, have been searching for what are the levers, what are the things that are going to help women and girls to get out of these situations. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on that, about the importance of investing in women in particular.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes. And I got schooled in exactly the same way. It's like eating humble pie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, I mean, I would say as early as 15 years ago, this was considered the silver bullet, and everyone all over the world was so excited. And as I said before, I don't want to discount or downplay the power that microcredit has had. I think we all just see it with a more nuanced lens now, knowing what it can do and what it can't do. But I think a few things to answer your question. First of all, we have to realize that we shouldn't paint marginalized populations, especially women and girls, with the same broad brushstroke, right?
Yes.
It is not a uniform segment. As much as it would make our lives much more simple to say, okay, this segment of the population has similar needs and they all need the same thing, it's simply not true. A lot of the women that I worked with, some of them definitely had an entrepreneurial instinct. And they were hungry for a small loan. They had ideas or they had connections. And so they were very quickly able to take capital and put it to work within a week, right? But I would say, honestly, there were more that didn't have that entrepreneurial tendency. Mm. And it's as if we were to say, every one of us is an entrepreneur, or every one of us ought to be an entrepreneur. And we know that's not the case. Some of us want that and are hungry for that, and others, we're perfectly content to say, no, I want a steady, stable job where I can fully exhibit my talents and my skills. And that is more to my liking. And so there were a lot of women that when I would talk about what microcredit can do for them said, I don't want a loan, I want a job. My first priority is putting food on the table for my kids or sending my kids to school. And I'd hear so many stories about how even if their husbands were earning, the money wasn't coming back into the household the way the woman wanted to. So she was desperate to earn. And when you put the burden of entrepreneurship on every one of these women, you're adding to their stress level in many ways. Now, yes, they want to earn, and entrepreneurship can be a vehicle for that. But if they don't have the idea or the wherewithal to, very quickly set up a business and start earning, now you've put a debt burden on them. You're making them figure out what that business ought to be. Can it be successful? And as we all know, by being entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship is very volatile. And you're adding volatility to an already volatile situation. Whereas if you can plug that woman into a job where she will get training, she will get benefits, she will get a fixed salary, suddenly adding stability into her life. And not only that, but especially for women and girls, you're giving them a safe place to be as well. Because for many of them, the home is not the safest place, but they can seek refuge in their work environment, they can get mentored, they have a social structure that can really help them work through their problems. And most importantly, they can start to be breadwinners. Mm-hmm. And the most amazing things that I see when I interact with some of our job holders and when I talk to them is when they say, the dynamics in my home have changed over the last few years. I am bringing in a steady paycheck every week, and it is more predictable, it is more stable than what the work my husband's able to find. Mm-hmm. And now I am being able to make decisions, and I am being taken seriously. Of course, this might take time, especially in a lot of the communities that we work with, but it is happening. And I think that's one of the best ways of being able to, really empower them is by giving them a voice, by giving them this economic opportunity.
I love that so much because I think there's been a very big data gap for a long time. and the kinds of information that we've been collecting about whether investing in women and small businesses works is based on an incomplete picture of what it's actually providing. And when I was doing both microcredit work and working on helping women get secure property rights, I would find this all the time. We were going out there and collecting this information, but initially the kind of data that we were collecting was how many households are getting land, not who within the household actually gets to say how the land is used and how the income from the land is actually going to be spent on the family. And so often I would go out to collect information about how people's lives had changed now that they had secure land rights. And the things that the women were talking about had nothing to do with like how much produce they were selling in the marketplace now that they had a secure plot of land to grow food on. It was about their decision-making power and their autonomy and their voice within the household, the respect that other people in the community gave them. Mm-hmm. And I really hope that going forward, more people center that in the work that they're doing, because it's so critically empowerment. That foundation is so undervalued and so important. I wonder, because of these various roles that you've taken with SKS, with Unitas, and with Upaya, if you have a story that you could share that would really kind of bring this to light, that would illustrate this.
I feel like I have so many stories, and I'm trying to think through if there is one that would really capture the essence of this. I remember, I think it was back in 2012 when we had made our first investment in a dairy company in the state of Uttar Pradesh in North India. And I had spent a lot of time in the field with this particular entrepreneur and was really going out of my way to talk to especially his first 50 job holders. And it was a dairy company, but we had made the decision, instead of creating a central facility where mostly women would come and milk the cows and, package the milk and everything, that it would be better to distribute the cows to various households. So by virtue of being an employee of this company, you were given a dairy cow that you would keep on your property. And then that way the women could manage all their household obligations and milk the cow and be able to distribute it to the network that would come by twice a day and pick up the milk from them. And I was very interested to see how this was working. And I still remember this vividly. I went to our very first job holder's house. Her name was Suman, and she had been employee number 1. And she lived in this mud and thatch home. She had set up a makeshift shed for the cow that she had just gotten. And I had met her a week earlier, but she had been very shy, and especially when somebody had told her I was visiting from the US, and that had unfortunately created a bit of distance. She was very reluctant to talk to me. And I think she was afraid of being judged. But when I went back about a week later, she was, very chatty. She was so enthusiastic. She wanted me to come in. She wanted me to sit down and have chai with her. And her mother-in-law was there. And very openly, in front of her mother-in-law, she said, I'm earning, and I am able to make decisions, and even my mother-in-law is listening to me now.
Wow, that's huge.
And anyone that knows, very traditional, how, Indian households and the extended family set up and the mother and daughter-in-law dynamic can probably attest to how powerful that was, and just within a span of a few days. Wow. And just the confidence that she was brimming with. And her mother-in-law just chuckled and nodded. But I thought, I can feel the balance, definitely tipping. And of course, these things take time, but just the fact that the women were aware of that and just that noticeable confidence that I saw as opposed to just a week earlier, that had really stuck with me. And for the first few years at Upaya, we would tell someone's story and we would share, some of the photographs from that visit that I had taken, just, as kind of an anecdote of how powerful this could be.
I love that story. That's beautiful. I wonder if I'm thinking about all of the people who may potentially be listening who haven't really heard of microcredit, or maybe if they have, they know a little bit about it, because of course Muhammad Yunus, who started the Grameen Bank, won the Nobel Prize, and that's really, I think, what made it shine for most people. They hadn't heard of it before then. But I wonder if you could maybe just give a brief summary for anybody listening about why you think it's important to invest in this kind of thing, in microcredit or in an organization like Upaya.
I think one of the most important things we can do as we fight poverty, so for anyone who cares about eradicating poverty, we have to bring financial services to the base of the pyramid. And as much as I don't like that particular phrase, there most certainly is a segment of society that is completely unbanked. Mm-hmm. And if I just think about my day-to-day life, right? I have access to bank accounts. I have a savings account that I can use. I have credit cards that I use very frequently. So I'm always, taking out loans to kind of stretch my own budget and purchase the things that I need because I might not have cash today. And without all of these financial tools at our fingertips, what would we have been able to do, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore, why do we expect people living in poverty to be able to, lift themselves up by the bootstraps or whatever idealistic view we have if they don't have basic financial tools? And so what I like to tell people is microcredit definitely solved a huge need whereby, if you're one of these women and you have an idea or you have the inclination to do something productive, there was no way on earth that somebody would lend you money, except maybe your local loan shark, and then you get indebted and it gets into an exploitative relationship and all these horrible things happen. If that's your only option, then it's no wonder you don't take someone up on it and you remain, just working within your home and not having an opportunity to earn. And so just making these small loans available really flipped a switch, I think. And that was the start of bringing other like micro financial services to bear. So now you see a rise of savings accounts for people, which is extremely important because where else do people keep the earnings that they now have, right? And how do they keep it safe? Mm-hmm. You have insurance products, which I would argue the poor need even more than we do, because of all the critical emergencies that they face. So I'm happy that we're starting to see more of that. And now you need to balance this financial portfolio out by making larger loans and other financial products available. So for example, back in 2010, I was hard pressed to find anybody funding a small and mid-sized business with an equity product. That really felt like it was unheard of. And with equity is more patient than with just a straight loan, right? Mm-hmm. If the entrepreneur is okay giving us like 5% ownership of his or her business, then we can give them $25,000, $50,000 as growth capital. And what we're telling them is, okay, 5 to 7 years from now, we want this to come back. We do want to exit our investment. And whatever we exit, we'll put towards a new investment, which is why it's important for us to be able to exit it. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to be the typical funder where we're going to push for high returns at the expense of everything else. We want this capital to grow with you. And so I see Upaya being a very important part of that whole, mix of financial products that, quite frankly, those of us, that live in this economic segment have always had, and we probably take it for granted. Now it's time to make all of those things available to the poor.
I love that. Thank you. I'm thinking about how so many people right now are looking for ways that they can give back. And what I'm encouraging is for people to really be thinking more broadly about what is the kind of world that they really want to see. Because during these COVID times that have us doing this interview over Zoom instead of, together in a room, they really just have been magnifying the inequities in our systems. And I really encourage people to be thinking differently about how they're giving right now. Giving does not necessarily just have to be to 501c3. Giving might be supporting the small business nearby that really needs it. Giving also should really be, I think, with an eye towards the kind of world that we want to create, because I think there is a global reset that is coming. And I think that women are going to be centered in it very differently, particularly women of color. So I'm really encouraging people to think about those kinds of things when they invest. And I know that in light of the coronavirus situation, Upaya has had to change its strategy too. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this three-wave strategy that you've created to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I think it was about 2 weeks ago, I wrote a blog post about this, just in case it would be helpful as like a frame for other people to think through as they are thinking about how they should pivot. Because I think all of us are being called upon right now to be able to adapt, right? And pivot what we were doing previously to meet the needs. And so we are thinking about this in 3 phases. The first is just immediate relief, right? Because that's really what people, especially in India during the lockdown and the economic crisis that is created, they need avenues of immediate relief. And so we are helping in a few ways there. My team in India has done a fantastic job of compiling a list of rapid response funding, a lot of these grant programs that have just been created overnight. And we are actually helping our partner businesses apply to them, just so it's one less thing that they have to worry about. We're also helping them with their own fundraising campaigns. We are working with them to take the funding that we have given them and deploy it more as, say, paid leaves for staff or advances on salaries. Because we know that the most important thing we can do right now is for the poor to feel that they will still get paid. Even if the job isn't happening, even if the business has been put on hold, they need that cash coming in. If they don't have liquidity, they are really going to find themselves in a dire situation. So we just want to make sure that incomes still flow no matter what. In that second wave, we call it job stabilization. And that means that, the 15,000 jobs or so that we've created in our portfolio, we realize, unfortunately, that we may lose some of them, in this period, but we want to do everything we can to preserve as many as we can. And what that means is we need to support the businesses. And so we've gotten very creative with our own investment strategy. Like I said, we used to provide traditional equity and long-term equity for businesses. And we have gotten more creative with very flexible loan structures now. Loans, say, between $20,000 to $30,000 to $40,000, just to act as bridge financing, just to get a business through the next 3 to 6 months, because nobody knows what's going to happen in the next 3 to 6 months. So we're giving, this line to businesses that we think most need it, and we're telling them deploy it as you see fit, right? And then the third wave is what I like to call job creation, because one thing that's for sure is once the lockdown is lifted, once things slowly start to recover, whatever our new reality is going to be, the one thing we know for sure is that we are going to need jobs. Mm-hmm. We are going to need jobs to replace those that were lost. We're going to have many more people coming back into the workforce that badly need an income. And so we are also now building a pipeline of new companies that we think have a lot of potential, especially in a post-COVID world. Those that rely more on home-based work, those that are being very creative about still maintaining social distancing, if that's still going to be a thing a year from now. And we want to be ready to just invest in them and create these jobs as quickly as we can. Mm. So it's amazing. 8 weeks ago, we wouldn't have been thinking about this. We had a standard product and a standard way we were supporting entrepreneurs. And we've completely had to pivot, just with the notion of how can we alleviate the most critical needs now and then be in a good position a few months from now.
I love this so much. I think this is a really brilliant strategy. And actually, as you're talking, I'm realizing you're the first person that I've heard talk about that third wave response. Most people are still thinking about immediate response, like what can I do right now to stem the bleeding? But it makes me think about another friend of mine who does a lot of writing and blogging and posting about what it's like being a woman of color living with a disability, and how the first thing that she noticed was how quickly companies are now allowing employees to work from home when they always said this could never be possible before, right? And for people who are struggling with access issues, during these times when there's limited transportation right now, buildings aren't necessarily open, they've closed off the parts of the buildings that have accessibility ramps, etc. That is really, really powerful and meaningful. And so I have been thinking, I wonder who is going to be out there thinking about how we make jobs more accessible for people who are home-based, which for a lot of people may be women, and also how we make this more accessible for people with disabilities. And this is the first time that I've really heard somebody thinking about what that strategy is going to look like. So I love that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I have 2 more questions. They're sort of related. So I'm going to kind of combine them together. One of them is, who do you really look to for inspiration, especially when things are just crazy? Is there somebody like that you find yourself? And the second part of the question is, who else do you think that I should interview on this podcast?
Sure. So this might be a strange answer to your first question, but someone that I've always admired and someone whose life story I will always find fascinating, and I can't seem to read enough about her, is Helen Keller. Mm-hmm. I had first been introduced to Helen Keller's story when I was in 4th grade, because we all had a class project to, do some research and do a presentation to the class about, key and notable figures from history. And I had randomly been assigned Helen Keller, and at the age of 9, I hadn't heard of her. But then I read her story. I just had this insatiable curiosity about how she built a life and how much she managed to achieve without 2 of, her key senses. And it just really, I think it really ingrained in me this notion that you need not see these physical shortcomings as disabilities. And I don't think she ever saw it as holding her back. She just kept blazing a trail, and she found so many creative ways to overcome the fact that she was both blind and deaf. And for someone like that to go on to a higher education and give speeches and, just make all the remarkable progress she did, including for women's rights and, of course, for disability rights, I thought, wow, okay, I never have an excuse to say that I can't do something. And if I can just get a little personal for a second, I have also now been, getting used to my own physical disabilities. It was just a few years ago that I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, a neurological condition that has actually taken away a lot of the, I guess, physical abilities that I used to have. And I think of Helen Keller now more than ever. And I was just rereading her biography the other day. And it's always just the inspiration that I need, that no, I don't think any of us should sit on our laurels, and there's always going to be another way to do something. We just have to be creative. And actually along these lines, one woman that I think you should most definitely talk to, if you don't know her already, is Karen Bradmeyer. And I'm sorry if I'm, mispronouncing her name. I had heard of her through many of my mutual friends, and my own cousin actually, who lives here in Seattle. My cousin works in architecture, and Karen's name had come up because she is a Seattle-based architect, but she is so well known in the space of architecture. And just for groundbreaking ideas, for thinking about how spaces should be designed for those of us with the differing abilities, and for people, both in more marginalized situations. And I had the privilege of meeting her over coffee just a few months ago when one of our mutual friends arranged for it.
Wow.
And we were supposed to meet for an hour. I think I talked her ear off for about 3 hours. She was very kind about it. But we spent that whole afternoon together, and I just have not been moved quite like that in a very, very long time.
Wow. That sounds incredible. I don't know her, and now I'm so curious. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I actually have a good friend, Amarpreet, who is both an engineer and an architect. And I went on a trip to DC with her several years ago, and I watched her walk into buildings, and it completely changed from that point the way that I think about spaces. Just watching her observations, I could just see click, 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 like how much natural light is coming here, how much air is coming in here, and to think about the kind of work that she does, particularly helping to design institutions, and thinking about how important it is for our psyches to be connected with the outdoors and with nature, and not be completely closed off with windows that don't open and ventilation systems that don't allow fresh air. It really actually is remarkable, and so completely different than anything I've ever done in my life. So it's wonderful to meet people who study completely different fields, I think, because it really does influence the way that you think differently about your work. And I love that kind of cross collaboration. That's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, well, of course I've talked your ear off this entire time, but I've loved everything that you've had to say and to share, and it's just so valuable, the work that you've done, and I know that the people listening are going to be really excited to learn more about Upaya, and to hopefully think differently about where they can invest in meaningful ways to make greater opportunities for all. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Radha. This was such a pleasure. And I wish you all the best with this series. I think what you're doing is super, super important, especially in this new era that we're living in.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, take care.
You too.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If today's conversation piqued your curiosity, please comment below, review, and share it with your friends and colleagues. And let me know your suggestions for future guests you'd like to hear from. Also, follow me on social media. The links will be in the show notes. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter on my website at www.radhafriedman.org. If you want to be inspired, think big, and take action to advance gender equality, then subscribe to this podcast to hear more inspiring stories and tips on how we can close the gender wealth gap. Thanks for listening.